There are two certainties in life. One is that you'll never have a perfectly ripe avocado if you don't hire a full-time worker to stand watch and let you know the minute it's ready so you can speed home and eat it before the 5-minute period when they're good passes. And two is that within months of any beloved children's story entering the public domain, you can bet that ripe avocado that someone's gonna make a horror movie out of it. Perhaps the most well-known example in recent memory is Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, a low-budget slasher movie that was thrown together to cash in on the X IP that wound up garnering an obscene amount of attention online. And of course it did. This speaks for itself. People can't help but flock to the theaters when they hear about such an insane concept. Yeah, you heard me right. This was a theatrically released movie. Theaters are in a weird spot right now, aren't they? Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey is one of the movies that I regretfully missed out on last year. This is one of those things you hear about and you expect it'll go straight to a streaming service, but it actually released in theaters and I think my brain just refused to believe that that was true and completely forgot about it. Written and directed by Reese Frake Waterfield, one of the dopest names I've ever heard, by the way. It was made for $20,000, completely self-funded by the filmmakers, and made back 260 times its budget.
What did you say?
So I don't think it'll come as any surprise to anyone that there's a sequel on the way. Pretty soon, actually, and I figured now would be as good a time as any to give the thing a watch for myself and see what all the fuss was about. Not only do they have a second movie on the horizon, but this one was such a success that Waterfield plans on expanding this out into a public domain cinematic universe of horror movies with Bambi and Peter Pan getting the treatment in the near future. I'm gonna need to see the Bambi one. And you know, sometimes I want to pour out a nice glass of scotch and get under a blanket to watch The Lighthouse and develop a superiority complex, but sometimes I have the day off work and I want to drink piss water beer and eat sugary cereal and watch low-budget slasher movies. Charlie's Farm? Perfect movie for that occasion, by the way. So, you know, I was aware that the consensus was that this movie is terrible, but I went in thinking that maybe it'll still be a fun time. They've got such a stupid and fun concept with Winnie the Pooh and Piglet being starved and turned feral, and there's no way they could turn that into a boring and generic slasher, because what the hell would be the point of making that movie? You know what? All things considered, this movie doesn't make the worst first impression as far as Winnie the Pooh horror movies go. Mostly because they're the first ones to do it and no bar has been set yet, but also partly because this scene feels like they're setting up a decent concept for a horror take on the cozy children's story. It's a hand-drawn animation that looks like it was done up in about 4 hours with a 15-minute cereal break partway through, but enjoy it while you can because this is the most creative part of the movie by a similar ratio that their budget to return had.
One fateful night, on the brink of starvation.
Basically, the story we're going with here is that Christopher Robin grew up and stopped hanging out with them and bringing them food, so they wound up starving in a decrepit forest and resorted to eating Eeyore to stay alive, which is pretty funny, but it makes no sense once you see that the actual 100-acre woods looks perfectly fine. It doesn't look like a forest starved of all its life, but who gives a shit, am I right? The writers said there's nothing for them to feed on here, so that's the end of that. Writing!
The nights were deathly cold, the land barren and completely devoid of food.
Also, apparently they're crossbreeds, which means in this movie someone snuck out into the woods and fucked a bear, a pig, a donkey, an owl, and a rabbit. And if that's the case, I'm not really sure why they had to brand this as a Winnie the Pooh horror movie, but yes I do, because 26,000% return! When you change their origins and their nature this much, it's basically only a Winnie the Pooh movie in name, which, yes, it is. Christopher tried to go back to them years later with his fiancée, but she gets choked out with a chain and I guess cooked and eaten, but there's no way they had the budget to show that, so another hand-drawn frame will do just fine. Right off the bat, there is a general sense of just not giving a shit about anything, because part of that intro sequence is talking about how the creatures renounce any humanity in them and turn completely feral after being abandoned and eating Eeyore, but they still dress fully in human clothes, have a furnished and apparently well-kept deck with a nice fireplace in the center, sleep in trailers and an HGTV treehouse, and use store-bought weapons to play out their murders. Count that up with the fact that Pooh and Piglet don't look anything like feral half-breeds and instead just some random killers wearing shitty masks, and the fact that the movie never once uses their characteristics to design signature kills around, and you realize pretty quickly that this whole thing is basically the definition of a cash grab.
You seen him? Ain't been working for years.
We've got a group of 20-somethings taking some time in a secluded cabin after one of them had a traumatic experience with a stalker who wound up sneaking into her bedroom and trying to undress her while she slept, so they figure that the best place to bring her is a forest known for a disproportionate amount of murders and disappearances to ease her mind. Really nice Airbnb though. I'd be willing to look past a few brutal murders to stay in a spot like this. Does it also seem a little odd to you that they tried to implement a traumatic story into a Winnie the Pooh slasher movie? It's one of the first signs of this thing trying to take itself way too seriously and completely missing the mark on what could have made this a really fun time.
I don't want to keep living how I am.
I truly cannot recall a single character name aside from Christopher, Pooh, and Piglet, but that's because I already know who they are. The others blend together so much that Hot Tub Girl, Glasses Girl, and Trauma Girl are the only three I can actually characterize, and before anyone comes at me saying I'm reducing her to just being a trauma victim, that's not me, that's the movie. The purpose of introducing a character as having gone through something like this is generally so we can see them overcome the trauma through the events of the story, or at least have it explored in some capacity. You'd expect that perhaps through facing the threat of killers attacking her and her friends, she may find an inner strength she can use to fight back against them while proving to herself that she's stronger than she thought she was. Nothing like that happens though. She spends the whole damn movie running away and screaming and dies by getting her throat slit and body stabbed up to shit in the last scene of the movie, and then it just rolls credits. That's how this movie ends. The premise isn't expanded on or used in any sort of meaningful way, so basically it's a failed and lazy attempt to tack on some amount of character development for the viewer to latch onto. I'm also just really baffled by the fact that we're even talking about using trauma as a point of character development in a fucking Winnie the Pooh slasher movie. This is a stupid idea, and they should have leaned into that fully and committed to making an ultra campy goof flick, but instead we've got this lazy trauma angle and mean-spirited kill sequences that aren't remotely fun, creative, or styled to fit the setting. There are a lot of things that kill this movie, but that's probably the biggest one. If it had some heart to it, then it would have been a lot more enjoyable, but strip away the paint job on the killers, and this immediately turns into the bottom of the barrel lazy dreck that people who don't watch horror movies think every horror movie is. Just bullshit, nothing characters getting slaughtered for absolutely no reason, and what's more annoying about it is that the movie can't even play along with its own setup. We're told that the beasts have turned feral and have fallen back into their animalistic instincts, but they kill people with sledgehammers, machetes, and a fucking car while walking around like any wannabe Jason Voorhees would. They could have stuck someone to a wall using honey to let them marinate, and they have to peel themselves off to escape. Who gives a fuck if it's realistic? It's a Winnie the Pooh slasher movie. Instead of leaning into the characteristics of Pooh Bear and Piglet to create some unique kills, they just run people over with a car, and instead of making use of the feral state they're said to be in and have them move around like crazed animals, Piglet walks like he forgot to wipe properly, and Pooh Bear just fucking walks. The costumes look like shit too. Look at this and tell me if you see a hillbilly in a Pooh mask or a feral crossbreed. I know they were working on a very limited budget, but I've seen lower budget movies achieve more expressive and believable designs before, so this just comes down to them rushing to be the first ones to make a Winnie the Pooh horror movie so they could ride the wave without any competition. The kills themselves are equally boring, ranging from the coolest being when they run this chick's head over with a car and achieve the effect by just squishing a mask of her head in post, to just hitting them with a sledgehammer after the world's longest chase sequence that covers the least amount of ground. The kills are all extremely forgettable and often achieved with really bad CGI, and considering how little effort was put into everything else, I was hoping that this would be the one spot where the movie would show some creativity. Imagine the first Terrifier movie, but Art is wearing a clown mask and the kills aren't cool. Does that sound fun? That about sums up the experience of watching Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey. They also randomly throw in at the end of the movie that Pooh Bear can control swarms of bees, which isn't set up at any point earlier on unless you count seeing bees around him as setting up that he can magically control swarms of them. What's so baffling is the utter lack of fun in the kills, because trying to make dark and serious kills in a Winnie the Pooh slasher movie just doesn't work at all. A lot of the violence is just mean-spirited torture that goes on for way too long with zero payoff. We get what feels like 2 straight minutes of Pooh just whipping Christopher, and at one point they find this woman tied up who was apparently brought here earlier today, but talks like she's been trapped for weeks.
They're just these disfigured creatures.
Wanna know a scene in this movie? Pooh Bear ties up one of the women and spends God knows how long just slapping her in the face. How anyone could consider this entertaining is beyond me. So yeah, the killers in this movie are done in the absolute laziest possible way and are the clearest indicator that this was made entirely as a cash grab, not taking any advantage of the potentially fun concept and instead choosing to approach them as any bland slasher villain. Now, horror movies aren't known for having characters make the smartest decisions. I'll always push back against the idea that that's just how horror movies are, because there are plenty where that's not the case, but I think Blood and Honey may have the most egregiously stupid and infuriatingly lazy scene I've witnessed in a slasher movie in a very long time. Bikini Girl is hanging out in the hot tub taking selfies, and she spots Pooh Bear peeking out from around the corner of the house. You may think she'll climb out of the hot tub and go looking, right? That would be pretty stupid, wouldn't it? Thankfully, she doesn't do that. You know what she does instead?
Whatever. You're not ruining my holiday, you fat freak.
Nope. I'm done.
I'm not gonna let that ruin my night.
Yet again, this shows just how little of a shit anyone involved with making this movie gave about actually creating something even remotely good. My jaw was on the floor watching this scene, just trying to understand how the hell what I just saw was actually in a movie that released in theaters. I don't think anyone expected the characters in this movie to be academic scholars, and I didn't either, but the level of stupidity they achieve, it's contagious. It's truly unprecedented, and especially with the tone seeming to go for dark and gritty, it's mind-blowing watching these people operate.
Whoever it is probably wrote that.
You're a goddamn genius!
Getting chased in the woods? Try intentionally cornering yourself by a wood chipper. See that the killers might have gotten into your house? Go inside and lock the doors instead of driving away in the parked car outside. Want to escape a killer slowly coming after you? Trudge through a pool towards the deep end instead of getting out and running away. I fucking hate this scene, by the way. It goes on for so long. The reliability of this kind of decision making really is the only comfort here. You just know that every character is going to make the stupidest possible decision at every turn. One of the issues with the structure of slasher movies is that it's really hard to properly pace them, since the loop of stalking, then kill scene, then breather, then stalking, then kill scene, then breather can get really old really quickly if you aren't keeping things interesting in those 3 stages. Along with being in the running for the dumbest horror characters of the 2020s, this may also be one of the worst paced and edited. There are scenes in this movie with absolutely nothing going on that just drag out painfully. Shots will linger for disgusting amounts of time on empty or stagnant frames for seemingly no reason other than padding the runtime, and while I can forgive some poor editing decisions and lingering shots in Terrifier 2 because so much of that movie is fucking awesome, when a movie is already painful to watch, and then it also forces you to stare at literally nothing for extended periods of time, it borders on infuriating. Can you tell? It takes a lot for me to actually get mad watching a movie, but when this unrelenting bore fest that's so obviously a rushed cash grab started forcing these extended nothing scenes and shots, it drove me fucking crazy. It felt like I was being actively attacked by the experience of watching it, and not in a good way. Something that I always try to do in my videos is to acknowledge both the good and the bad of everything. Even if I hate a movie, I want to try to find some element of it that I can praise, both because it's important to do that if you're analyzing something, but also because I think it's good practice if you want to get into the craft of storytelling for yourself, which I do. I usually have no trouble finding something about a movie to praise, even if I don't like the overall product. Like, The Exorcist 2 has excellent sound design, and the animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's were basically perfect from a design standpoint. For Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey, the best I think I can come up with is that sometimes it looks sorta cool. I don't know why there's so much fog everywhere, but I like looking at it. The creature's home base makes absolutely no sense in the context of the movie, but when the firelight hits it just right, it looks fine. The thing is though, I can't go as far as to say that it's a good looking movie because it's not. For the most part, it's horribly shot and the editing is painful, but there are 1 or 2 frames here that look alright in a vacuum. I can't remember the last time I reviewed a movie where I can find so little good to talk about, and I don't like that. I'd hoped I could at least say that it was entertaining or charming or had some heart, but none of that is anywhere close to the truth. To go through this whole thing only for it to close off on the most empty, mean-spirited conclusion made me genuinely mad, which isn't something I've felt in a long time. I also don't like the precedent this sets, where we're showing that you can make the laziest, cheapest thing possible in a race to be the first when something goes public domain, and have it make back its money 260 times over, while genuinely creative and well-crafted indie films get overshadowed. I love indie filmmaking, and I'll forgive a lot of shortcomings in production value and scope because I can acknowledge the limitations that come with it, but this movie isn't bad because of low production value. It's bad because it's the laziest cash grab I've seen in a long time. There's that decent opening scene that sets up a more fun movie, but after that, this is just a slideshow of nothing characters being killed in boring ways by nothing villains while empty shots linger for an excruciating amount of time and generic horror swells define the soundtrack. There is no element of this movie that I can call good, but it feels like there was so little care put into anything beyond creating a husk that would draw people in with its poster and gimmick, so I don't even know if the filmmakers thought this was good. Apparently, the second movie is essentially what they wanted to do with this one, and in all honesty, the trailer does look like a huge step up from this. I'm still weary it's going to take itself too seriously, and it seems to share the same problem of not following its own premise of the villains being feral beasts, but I am willing to give Waterfield one more shot to prove that this really was just a sizzle reel and that maybe there's some hope for this public domain cinematic universe. I highly doubt it, because Terrifier was also a sizzle reel that focused all of its resources on the strongest element, and you can see where the gold is in that first movie. Art the Clown is the only thing worth a damn in that first Terrifier, but I don't see that one element here that feels like it's a good base to build off of with a higher budget. I'm doubtful, but I'll give it a shot. I also wanted to mention that, because I really don't enjoy making videos where I'm just bashing movies. Oh, what should the comments look like after that one? The point that I'm making is that the guys behind this movie seem like genuinely nice people, and I don't have anything against them personally, even if I think they set a precedent for indie filmmakers that isn't all that inspiring. I'm curiously looking forward to seeing Blood and Honey 2, but if it's the same sort of lazy bullshit that this was, oh God. My buddies at Splattercast have interviewed the dudes behind Blood and Honey and its sequel, and they have apparently promised that this upcoming one is going to be an actual movie with some amount of effort put into it and that it's much closer to the thing they wanted to do in the first place. Only time will tell, I suppose. We'll be covering Omen 4 next week as we inch ever closer to the release of the first Omen, and then I'll be taking a look at the only sequel ever to release to Sinister. This is going to be a brutal few weeks. Until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.